Welcome to the EWTM Accounting Excel Seminar in Seattle. Now, this video here is going to be an epic video. This is for a conference in Seattle. It's going to be like between an hour and 2 hours long. Here are the topics over on this sheet. We'll look at the subtopics. A couple things before we start this video. One is, if you want to download this workbook and follow along and practice with the video, click on the link below the videos. Not only that, but because it's such a long video, here's the 9 main topics. Over on the subtopic sheet, here are the subtopics. You want to click the Show More button below because there will be hyperlinks to the different parts of the video. You click on the time hyperlink and it will jump. So if you want to talk about percentage number format, show more, click on the time link. Now there's going to be this is a huge video. We're going to cover keyboards, number formatting, efficient formula creation. Look at all those topics. These topics will be below in the show more. Lookup formulas, a huge section on pivot tables, 2 recorded macros, and a bunch of things on charts. All right, so you can download the file. You can click the show more and go to that hyperlink, and we're using Excel 2010. So we're going to start with our first topic, keyboards. I'm going to click on the sheet called keyboards. Now, of course, if you don't know how to be efficient with formulas, you don't know how to create pivot tables and other Excel features, then you're going to have a hard time working and using Excel. But what's the most important thing to becoming efficient after you have some basic foundation knowledge? Keyboard shortcuts. Now, let's look at a few here. I'm just going to show you a few throughout the videos. I'll be using keyboards. What you want to do is you want to take the time and teach yourself keyboards because, man, they're fast. Let's look at our first keyboard. If I'm just looking at this data set and I don't know how many records there are, well, I could scroll down and look for the bottom, right? But no, you don't want to scroll down. Let's do Control Arrow. Control Arrow jumps to the bottom of the current region. It keeps going until it sees a blank cell and stops. If you Control Arrow now and there's nothing, it'll go to the bottom. Another really helpful keyboard shortcut is Control Home. You're working in the spreadsheet. You're a couple hundred rows down. And you're like, I just want to get to the top. Control Home always goes to A1. Now, another useful keyboard is, let's say we want to highlight all of this range here. If I have one side of the range selected, before I click on this next range, if I hold the Shift key, boom, it highlights everything between. Touch the first part. Before touching the last part, hold Shift, and boom, you've highlighted the whole thing. And then you could do something like add a number formatting. I could go up to the Home and then apply either accounting or currency. Now, wait a second. I just have my ribbons collapsed because it gives me more room. How did I do that? You could right-click Unminimize in 2010, or there's a keyboard. Control F1 is a toggle. Control F1 toggles on and off the ribbon tabs. Now, we could get the currency there. Not only that, we could use the keyboard, and it's right here, Control 1. Control 1, that opens the Format Cells dialog box, because so much of what you do in the spreadsheet is cells. This is a powerful dialog box, and we'll look at a bunch of options throughout the videos. This is number formatting. So I'm going to click on currency or accounting. Now, the nice thing about using this dialog box is then you have control. You could say, I don't want to see decimals. I'm going to click escape so it doesn't apply. Can you believe it? There's a keyboard shortcut for currency. And I use this all the time because I have huge data sets and I need a quick currency format. Control Shift 4. Absolutely amazing. Now, let's talk about not click, shift, click, but something much more useful. What if I wanted to highlight this whole column and add a number format? This is huge, right? I could do this manually, but not this one. Well, guess what? We can combine Control down arrow, Control Home, with the Shift trick. So watch this. Control down arrow would jump to the bottom, but if I hold Shift, boom, instantly the whole column is highlighted. Control Shift 4 to add currency. Unfortunately, there isn't an accounting a keyboard for the accounting number format. Now I'm going to Control F1. Currency and accounting, what is the difference? Currency has this floating dollar sign. Accounting has the dollar sign fixed on the outside. People like accounting number format because it lines up the decimals. But a lot of time these dollar signs here, you don't want them. Whoa, check this out. This is 2007, 10, and 13. Accounting number format is right there. It's not currency, that's accounting. And look at this. In earlier versions, this has always been here, but it was called the comma style. But guess what? It's really, if you read this screen tip right here, it's really accounting without the dollar sign. People like that comma because it lines everything up, no dollar sign. Now notice that we have some decimals showing here. There's no problem. We can come up and use our decrease decimal button here. But I want to show you the QAT. This is the quick access toolbar. And if you look at your computers, probably doesn't look the same as mine because I've altered mine. You can simply right click, customize quick access toolbar. And the trick is, once you get to this options, this is the options area. It's automatically on quick access. You come up to choose commands from, and you want to say all. I wish that was the default instead of popular, right? So all. Then there's all like 1,000 plus things you can do in Excel. Now, you can add any button. You can go through this list and say add. Originally, I had undo, redo, save. There's keyboards for those, so I got rid of them by saying remove. Notice I've added a few here. I'm going to click OK. What's so cool about that is watch this. We got to talk about the Alt keyboard shortcuts. Now, in earlier versions, when you hit the Alt key, it underlined menus. But since 2007, they show you these screen tips. Now, we'll show you, especially when we do pivot tables, there's a great keyboard shortcut that we derive from using the Alt keys. But notice up here on the QAT, whatever buttons you put, first, second, third, and whatever order you put, there's a 1. So I've hit Alt. If I tap 1 now, it will apply this. I'm going to click Escape. So really, after you get the hang, you teach yourself your Alt keyboard shortcuts. For here, I'm going to Alt 1, Alt 1. Just like that, it decreases the decimal. Now, that's your sort of personal Alt keyboards, because each computer can have a different order to the QAT buttons here. 1, 2, 3. Now, the Alt keys for a pivot table will be the same on each sheet. So here, just to show you how awesome these Alt keyboards are, here's a data set. Field names at the top, records and rows. Let's hit the Alt key. Which one of these would we use to get to data? Well, you'd think that the pivot table would be there, but it's not. They put it on insert. You got to tap N, and look at that. It opens up that ribbon tab. So to get to pivot tables, you hit V, and then to table, you hit T, and then it would ask you. So if you do pivot tables all the time, you teach yourself that Alt keyboard. The reason they designed Alt to show up with little screen tips, this is so that each person in their daily activities, if they're always doing area charts, they'll teach themselves the keyboard for that. If you're always doing pivot tables, you'll learn Alt and VT. All right. Now, we want to talk about the sum function. The sum function is one of over 400 functions, and it's the only one with a keyboard shortcut. Hey, why? Because it's used so often. Now, let's go to the home ribbon and just take a second. Since everybody, if you want to be efficient, if you use Excel, you should know this keyboard. But if you don't remember it, no problem. A lot of the elements in the ribbon, like hover over B, it says Control B. Hey, that's one of the oldest keyboard shortcuts ever. But hover over the auto sum. So if you forget, the keyboard is what? Alt plus equals. You ready? Alt equals. Now, the dancing ants are dancing around. They're dancing so that if it didn't guess right, it's as if Excel is being polite. It's saying, hey, I know I might not have guessed the right range. You can redirect it either with your mouse or with your arrow keys. As long as the dancing ants are still dancing, you can still redirect. So I'm going to click right there and watch this. We're going to use Control-Shift-Down arrow, not for formatting the cells, but to Control-Shift-Down arrow, insert, arrange into a formula. Look at that, B2 to B1001. Now, if I hit Enter, it goes down one cell. I'm going to show you an alternative here. Watch, Alt equals. Now, I'm going to use my arrow key, left arrow, right arrow, and then that's just to get the cell started in B2, and then Control Shift down arrow. Instead of using Enter, I'm going to use Shift Enter. Shift Enter puts the thing in the cell and jumps the cursor up. Now let's try this down here. Alt equals, that puts the sum function in. Instead of hitting Enter and pushing my cursor down, because I immediately want to format the cell after I enter the formula, I'm going to use the keyboard Control Enter. Control Enter puts the thing in the cell, keeps the cell selected. Again, the idea is most people do Enter and then click back or arrow back, and that's an extra click that you don't need. Now we immediately want to add double line accounting. So I'm going to Control 1 to open Format Cells. On the Font tab, I'm going to go to Underline, and there we have single or double accounting underline. And then I click OK. That's different than the border. Up here, this would put double line for the whole cell. This just does the number. All right, keyboards, absolutely fundamental to being efficient in Excel. Our next topic is number formatting. Let's go click on the number formatting sheet. Hey, wait a second. I bet you there's a keyboard shortcut to jump from this sheet to keyboards to number formatting. There is. If you're going to the right, Control Page Down jumps to the next sheet. Now watch this, Control Page Down. I'm just page down. When it gets to some sheets that there are some sheets that are not showing, they're under the scroll bar, it will not only activate the next sheet, but it will expose sheets not visible. Absolutely amazing. Now to go to the left, Control Page Up. It's a great keyboard shortcut, especially when you have a huge workbook filled with many sheets. Now, keyboards are really fundamental to becoming efficient. A topic that many people are not aware of is number formatting. Now, lots of people, on the planet Earth, everyone uses Excel in many different endeavors. And people know how to use formulas and pivot tables. But a lot of times, number formatting will trip them up. But here's the deal. There's only one concept you need to get, and then you understand number formatting. It's a facade. Number formatting, like accounting, currency, percentage, is just something that sits on top. It's like painting the house or putting a Halloween mask on. The surface can be different than underneath. Now, let me delete these. If I come here and Alt equals, Tab, Tab. Notice I put something in the cell and I was immediately going to the right, so I use Tab. Alt equals. Now what's going on here? I can clearly add this in my head. These should equal 100, and these should equal 100. Well, what we see on the surface of the spreadsheets can sometimes be different than what's actually in the cell. I'm going to highlight these, and I'm going to notice that up here on the Quat, I have increase as the second button, so I'm going to Alt 2. And there we go. We can see that number formatting, something as simple as decreasing the decimal, was showing us something different on the surface of the spreadsheet. That number 49.5 is what was sitting in the cell. Down here too, Alt 2. Now I'm going to actually highlight all this in Alt 1. Notice I'm seeing a 50. That's the surface. That's the facade. You can look for with some number formats, you can look up into the formula bar and see what's actually in the cell. Absolutely important if you're going to be able to track down errors and not get tricked by number formatting. One of the most important types of number formatting to understand is date number formatting. Now let's learn an important keyboard shortcut. If you're hard coding dates into Excel, say you're doing transactions, instead of typing out today's date, how about the keyboard Control semicolon? I absolutely love that. Now let's do that again. Control semicolon. I'm going to Control Enter. Now look there. That's what it looks like. I see on the surface of the spreadsheet an 8, a slash, a 26, 2013. And if you look up to the formula bar, hey, it looks like that's what's in the cell. But now, the trick is we can wipe away all number formatting, apply general, and you'll see what's in the cell. What? 41,519? You got to be kidding me. and I'm going to Control Z because this is so important to know about general number formatting, especially if you're working with dates and times, because number formatting gets applied when you don't like it. The keyboard shortcut is Control Shift grave accents or tilde. So Control Shift grave accents or tilde, and that applies the general formatting. Now that's pretty weird, but this is convenient. When they first started making spreadsheets, they wanted people to be able to enter dates into the cell and do date math. So we could subtract two dates and figure out how late an invoice was. The first day in Excel history is 1/1/1900. Day 2 is 1/2/1900. 9/4 is 41,521. So that's the day that the seminar will be given. This is the day that I'm shooting the video. So that's convenient. But again, there's this disconnect. If you click here and look up here, they didn't, for whatever reason, they didn't put the actual number there. Probably because most people would just say, what is that? But we know it's just counting. It's a serial number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up to whatever day it is since December 31st, 1899. So since that date, 1/1/1900 is 1. Since this date here, 41,521. Now, the reason this is so important is because, of course, we can do date math. I put whatever date I'm going to do, Control semicolon, and Enter. The way you do date math to figure out the difference between two dates, I'm going to type in equal sign, and I'm going to use my arrow keys, because if the formula inputs, the cells with the things you want to calculate upon, are close, it's more convenient and quicker to use your arrow key. So I'm going to do the minus sign and then up arrow. That'll give us the difference, and that's perfect for invoicing. That's the way invoicing or loans, days that a loan is outstanding. However, if you have a project, you have to remember to subtract the later date minus the earlier date and then add 1 back in. So anytime that the start date is included, you want to add 1 back in. Now, there is a keyboard shortcut for the current time. It is Control Shift semicolon, and that'll give you the current time. And actually, really cool, you can do Control semicolon space Control Shift semicolon, and that'll give you the date and time. Now let's just look at these two things here. I'm going to wipe away the number formatting and look at general, Control Shift tilde or grave accent. So if we had today's date, Control semicolon, Control Enter, Control Shift tilde, you see it's just an integer. Time is always a number between 0 and 1, representing the proportion of one 24-hour day. And if you do them both, it combines them. Now, the reason that time is a serial number between 0 and 1, if only I could type. Anyway, the reason that time is a number between 0 and 1 is because it represents a proportion of one 24-hour day. So what they do is they say 8 divided by 24 equals 1/3, or 0.333333 out to 15 threes. Or if it's noon, that number will be 0.5. So if I were to type in the cell 8:00 space AM tab, notice it puts it shows that. There's the time up there. Over here, if I type noon, 12:00 PM. If I wipe away the formatting, Control Shift tilde, I get those numbers. Time, again, the idea is equals 8 divided by 24 equals 12 divided by 24, the proportion of one 24-hour day. Now let's scroll down and look at some time examples. Here's some times typed into the column. If you click on the cell there and look up in the formula bar, you can see, oh yeah, look, they're both showing that number formatting. But we know that this decimal that represents a proportion of one 24-hour day, that's actually what's in the cell. Now this is important because if we want to start doing formulas like time math, figure out time billed as an integer and decimal, if we take our formula equals later time minus earlier time, Control Enter, it's going to calculate upon the decimals. Further, because we're using formula inputs here that have a number formatting, that number formatting got sucked right here. So it looks like it's an acceptable 3.5 hours. It looks like I could type a wage like 25 and then come down here and say equals that 25 times the 3.5. But what do I get? Well, again, I'm sucking that number formatting. Remember, this keyboard shortcut Control-Shift-tilde is invaluable if you're doing date and time number formatting. Well, that's ridiculous. What's happening is 25 times Control-Shift-tilde, 0.14, that's giving this answer. This person, if they work 3.5 hours, is going to get a lot more than $3.64. No problem. It's a decimal, and Excel thinks that a decimal is a proportion of 1 24-hour day. So I'm going to hit F2 and edit this. We simply force the subtraction to calculate first and multiply times 24. Now, we'll talk about in our next topic. These are formula inputs, all of them. That's an operator. These are parentheses to force the subtraction before the multiplication. But notice, these are numbers that have the potential to change. So we put them in the cells, label them, and use cell references to refer to those formula inputs. This, however, is not going to change. This is a formula input that you can just flat out type into your formula. All right, we'll come back because that's one of the most important topics in Excel also. We'll talk more about when you can type numbers into formulas and when you can't. All right, now let's, we looked at time there. We can see now that the gross is totally correct, 87.5. One last number formatting, and this, as accountants, everyone uses percentages. So the number, of all the years I've been teaching and doing conferences and consulting with Excel, the number one mistake that I've seen has to do with percentage number formatting. And here it is. Someone wants 3%, so they type a 3 into the cell. And then they either Control 1, percentage, go up to here, percentage, however you do it, and they get 300%. The problem is Excel obeys you perfectly. We put the number 3 in there. It slid the decimal and added a percentage symbol, all as a number formatting. That number 3 is still in the cell. Control-Shift-tilde shows us that that 3 is in the cell. So that's not how you do it. If you type the number in first, or there's decimals from some calculation, say 0.03, that will work. You can apply a number format to that. But don't forget, the 3, that's beautiful if you made 300% profit from this quarter to next quarter, but it won't work for tax rates. Let's look at adding the percentage format before you put the number in the cell. Because here, if we put the number in the cell first, and then second apply the number formatting, we get problems. But watch this, and I don't know how they decided that it works this way, but I'm going to apply percentage format before I put anything in the cell. Then if I type a 3, and by the way, you can always tell it's pre-formatted because that percentage symbol pops up. That's not going to be a problem. But watch this, 0.03. The percentage symbol doesn't pop up, but it works. So those are two important things if the cell is pre-formatted. Now, a lot of times with percentages, you're just typing out. You can actually type format as you type. So I'm going to type 3.00. Right now, if I hit Enter or Control-Enter, the integer 3 goes into the cell. But if I type a percentage symbol, I'm saying, hey, I'm formatting as I type. So when I Control-Enter, yes, we see the percentage number format, but the number that went into the cell is 0.03. Control-Shift-tilde will verify that. I'm going to Control-Z. Wait a second. I don't have the undo and redo on my quat here. And the reason why is those are like our best friends. We use them 100 times every day. So Control-Z is undo. Control-Y is redo. I'm going to Control-Z and leave it there. Here's another big problem with percentage number format. Someone has done some calculation. They get 0.025. That's going to be some rate. They come up and they use this percentage button. Oh no, my 2.5% is converted to a 3. Again, it's just number formatting. If you're not aware that there's a disconnect between what you see on the top and what's underneath you, and you can get into trouble. Now, interestingly enough, this will show us 2.5 there. So if you're looking up in the formula bar, you can see it's correct. But really, we should increase the decimal either with these buttons or with the quad. I'm going to Alt-2. By the way, Alt-1, you can prove that to yourself. That is not 3%. So equals 100 times 3% will give us $3, but formulas don't see number formatting. Now we want to go to our next sheet. I'm going to use Control Page Down, and we want to talk about formulas, and then we're going to look at some lookup formulas on this sheet. Now, we already alluded to Excel's golden rule, and it is if a formula input data of any sort can change, put it in a cell and refer to it with the cell reference. If it doesn't change, you can go ahead and hard code it into the formula. We saw an example earlier where we had times. Those could change, so we use cell references. And the 24 hours in our formula wasn't a formula input that can change, so we typed it in. Now this goes back to Bricklin and Frankson's original spreadsheet. Their idea was they didn't want to have to re-enter a bunch of variables into a formula if only one of them changed. So they thought they created the first spreadsheet, VisiCalc. That's Excel's golden rule. Now, in the book I wrote, Slaying Excel Dragons, I have a huge chapter on formula. And what I've done is I've kind of taken a bulleted list of all the ideas from there. So if you want to read through this, you can. Here's all the type of things that can go into formulas. Those are formula elements. We have our math operators, our comparative operators, different types of formula. These are just the terms I use. We'll look at some examples of each one of these. Here is the order of precedence, or this is how Excel calculates a formula, which really comes in handy if you make complicated formulas. It can help to shorten a lot of formulas, or knowing this can help you track down errors. We have number formatting. We talked about that. Data alignment. Text is always to the left. Numbers are always to the right. That is an important default setting, which helps you track down errors like, are numbers really being considered text? Logical formulas, we'll see an example. The answer always gets spit out centered in the middle. That is a default setting in Excel. All right, let's look at some examples here. First example, just a simple example. We have annual insurance, and we want to calculate the monthly allocation. Well, I'm going to say equals formula input. That's a number that can change, and I'm going to divide it by 12. That's a formula input that probably is not going to change, so it's all OK to hard code this in. Now, I call this a calculating formula. It just means that gives you some number answer. There is an equal sign, cell reference, math operator, and a number that's not going to change. Now, let's look at violation of our golden rule. We want to calculate a tax, so we say, hey, take this amount times 0.125. Now, a bunch of you should be laughing, right? Because people all over the world since the beginning of spreadsheet time have been doing this. Why is it a bad idea? Because when you hit Enter, I don't see any indication of how I made that calculation. Even if you come back to it next week, you know, you're looking at the spreadsheet and you're like, I don't know where the cells are that have the interest calculation or the whatever it is. So you don't want to hard code those in. A much better formula, of course, is, hey, let's take our amount times our rate. Not only that, not only do you want to actually put it in a cell, you want to label it also. So when you come back later or someone using the spreadsheet, they know what's going on. Now, there's an amazing link over here. There's been research done on this topic. If you go read this link here, it's called it's an article, The Risk of Spreadsheet Errors. They found it to be the #1 contributor to spreadsheet mistakes and faulty spreadsheets. I know from my own experience, it is just havoc when you have to deal with a spreadsheet where you hard code variables into your formula where they really should be put on the face of the spreadsheet and labeled properly. Here's an even better example, right? We want to figure out the net cash in, so we, including tax considerations. So we have our original principal times the interest rate, and then we want to consider taxes, so we take 1 minus the tax rate. That'll give us our net cash in from a particular interest revenue. Now, of course, I have some examples down here. This is just not efficient to actually type those in, and this is even worse, right? Because so you've combined. If you have 0.0375, you come back later and you're looking at it, you don't know what the tax rate is, you don't know what the interest rate is. You want to, if you're building a spreadsheet, label, formula inputs, use cell references. All right, let's go look at our next example here. We have revenue and some expenses. I'm going to say equals, go up with my arrow key, get the revenues minus, and I'm going to type a function right in the formula. Now, I'm going to do my up arrow and then hit shift, up arrow, up arrow. So we're seeing for the first cell reference, we just arrowed. But if we want to range, we can click on the first cell, and while holding shift, arrow, 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 and then close parentheses. Now, in this formula, equal sign, cell reference, math operator, a function, and then a range of cells. Control Enter. That gives us our answer. Let's go look at our next example. Now, this is going to be an example of a logical formula. Are these two in balance? I'm going to say equals. Now, the equal sign as the first character in a cell when you're in edit mode makes a formula. But anytime you put another equal sign, it's considered a comparative operator. So I'm going to say, is whatever's in C122 equal to D22? Control Enter. False. Well, I can see with my own eyes that these are in balance. But when I see something like this, I immediately suspect number formatting. That's why we have logical formulas like this. Lots of accountants everywhere are checking their work. If I were to highlight this and decrease decimals, increase decimals, Alt-2, a bunch, and I can see, there's an extraneous decimal. Now, it may not be number formatting, but at least the formula signals that there's a problem. Something isn't in balance. So I changed it. Control Enter, and maybe I'll highlight this and Alt-1. This logical formula, very useful. Tells us that there's some trouble and we need to investigate. All right, next type of formula. So we've seen calculating, which gives us a number answer, a logical formula, which gives us true or false. How about a text formula? There's lots of great examples for text formulas. Here's one. We have first and last, and we need to combine them in one cell. How about an equal sign? And we'll go get whatever's in this cell, and we'll join it using the join symbol, Shift-7, the ampersand, and I'm going to join it with whatever's in cell D134. Now, a join symbol will take whatever's in that cell and this cell, put it together, Control Enter. It joined two things, but we really need three things. So I'm going to hit F2. That is the keyboard shortcut to put a formula in edit mode. I'm going to come right after the ampersand, and I need a space. Any text, including the space character, has to be put in double quotes if you're going to use it in a formula. So double quotes, both space, double quote, and then a second ampersand because we're joining three things. Control Enter. And now I want to copy this down the column. This is the selection cursor. If I take my selection cursor and move it towards the lower right-hand corner, there's that little fill handle. My cursor gets close, and it turns to a crosshair, or I like to call it an angry rabbit. You can double-click and send it down. It'll copy the formula down the column. As long as there's something to the left, the right, or below it, it'll copy until it sees an empty cell and stop. All right, let's look at our next formula example. Here's an example. We have some numbers, and we want to count how many are greater than 350. Now, this formula input has a comparative operator and a number together in the cell. You can see it's a line to the left. It looks like it's being considered text. I'm going to say, well, wait a second. I want to make a formula. I can use the built-in function COUNTIF. Now, COUNTIF has been around a long time. I simply highlight the range, comma, and the criteria. Whoop, it will count with one condition. Control Enter. There are two. Now, in this case, it's perfectly all right to combine these two. There's a bunch of D functions, dsum, dcounta. They're very nice, and they like to combine comparative operators and numbers like this, but there's some cases where you don't want that. Here's an example here. We have a 350 here, and we need to use that as a number in other formulas. So here we're going to use the same count if, but we're going to have to take our range and combine a number. I'm going to type a comma, get to the criteria argument. The number, but I need the comparative operator before it. So in double quotes, I'm going to say greater than, end double quote, and join it using the ampersand. That's the construction for functions like countif, SUMIF, countifs with an S, SUMIFs, average if. You can combine right in your formula. Now, if you know anything about formulas and you use sum product to do array calculations, this is not how you do it for those type of formulas. But for the countif and the formula similar, that's how you have to combine a comparative operator and a number formula input. Or actually, you can have other types of inputs too. That will give us the same thing. Now, why do we have to do it that way? Well, I have a formula over here. You know what? I'm going to show you the clear. So here's home. There's the clear. I want to get rid of all the formatting because it's hard to read that formula there. Clear. The eraser does everything. Actual content, either formula or data, and the formatting. Clear formatting does just the formatting, and clear contents, that's like the delete key. So I'm going to say clear formats. And if I put this in edit mode, I can see I've joined some text and what's ever in that cell. What's nice about this, and I'm going to Control Z to put that formatting, is if I come here and type 475, enter, our text formula updates, our calculating formula updates. So that's awesome. If we had a comparative operator there, this formula wouldn't work out so well. All right, let's look at our next formula example. We are going to look at the SUMIFs function. Now in 2007 and later, there's SUMIFs, countifs, and average ifs. They all make calculations with one or more condition. Now let's do a formula here. We want to add from this column based on two conditions. I'm going to type equals SUM. Now notice there's this drop down. We've seen it a few times already, but I haven't mentioned it. You can arrow through this, and once you find a function you want, you can hit tab. Now let's just look at SUMIF. This has been around forever. It only adds with one condition. Notice the screen tip range and sum range. I'm going to backspace, down arrow, and hit tab and compare that. This is a screen tip, and the actual descriptions in the screen tips are much more explicit. Sum range, criteria range. It's clear which is which. So not only is the screen tip more polite, but we can do one or more conditions. So I tend to use SUMIFs all the time now for one or two or three conditions. Now the sum range, I simply highlight the range there, comma, criteria range. Now this is and criteria, which means both conditions must be true. You can enter them into the SUMIFs function in any order you want. I'm going to say the sales rep column for criteria range, comma, and then the criteria for that column. Criteria 2 will be product. That's the whole range, comma, and then the criteria will be criteria 2. Control Enter, and there we go. If we change this, of course, it will update. There aren't, Celia did not sell any product 2s. All right, so look at our next example. Hey, we're going to use the SUMIFs again, but we want to talk about between criteria. Here's a column of dates, and we want to count between a lower and upper date. So I'm going to come here and use SUMIFs. The sum range, hey, we're counting units. And guess what? The criteria range 1 and 2 will both be dates, comma, and the criteria. Now notice what we did here. I actually typed this out. Greater than or equal to 9/22. So this is text. But the SUMIFs will properly interpret that as greater than or equal to that date. That is not a serial number sitting in the cell. It's actually text. That'll be our first criteria. Criteria range 2 is the date, and there is our upper value. Now notice we've included an equal sign. There's no single greater than or equal to or less than or equal. There's two characters in both of those cases. When you're doing between criteria, you got to be careful. Sometimes you want to include the upper and lower. Other times you want to only include one, either the lower or the upper. All right, Control Enter, and that will add between those two dates. If you have actual serial numbers, then you have to do the construction where we use comparative operators and join them to our criteria. All right, so our criteria range bold time is going to be dates. And watch this. For our criteria, I'm going to say greater than or equal to all in double quotes and then join it. This is a serial number. So up here, SUMIFs properly interpreted this text. Here it will properly interpret the serial number joined to the text. Now, watch this. Here's a great trick. If you have a certain function argument that you have and you want to highlight, you can click on the screen tip and highlight it. Not only that, but you can evaluate it to see what it is, what it evaluates to, what the formula thinks it is. I'm going to hit the F9 key. That's evaluate. Now, I want to immediately undo that using Control Z, but just for a moment, see, that's much different than this. And SUMIFs, COUNTIFs, all those functions will interpret it correctly. Control Z. All right, comma, we get our date range for a second time. Now I'm going to do criteria in double quotes, less than or equal to, in double quotes, join, and there's our serial number. Close parentheses and Control Enter. Very useful. Sometimes you have to summarize by months, and you can have a column of begin and end, or years, or whatever it is. Now let's do our third example. We want to count between 1,000 and 1,500 all of the units that fall within this category. For this one, however, we will include the lower limit but not the upper limit. So we'll see sum ifs. We're going to get our sum range, and guess what? All three times we will highlight the units column. So sum range, and then we have two criterias on this. Between criteria is one way to think of it, and criteria. Both of these have to be met. So double quotes, greater than or equal to, and double quotes, and join it to the lower limit. And we'll highlight the units for a third time. That's our criteria 2, comma, and then greater than in double quotes. Join with our upper limit. All right, and there we, that's the sum of all of the units that were between these upper and lower. All right, useful to do between or and criteria like that. Let's go ahead and look at our next example. This is an example where we have a new function in Excel 2010 called Workdays International. Now, what we'd like is to be able to count for a project between a start and an end. We have some holidays, and our weekend is Sunday, not Saturday and Sunday. So we use the net working days. Now, net working days has been around long before 2010, but it only considers the weekend, Saturday and Sunday. So this new function is just awesome. Down arrow, tab. We give it our start, our end, comma, our weekends, and there it is, this beautiful drop down. We can select whichever we want. I'm going to double click 11. Finally, our holidays. I'm going to go ahead and highlight, and notice some of them are empty just in case next time we use this template we need some extra holidays there. Those empty cells will not interfere with the correct calculation. Now, we're going to copy this formula down the column, and these two are relative cell references. As we copy down, the formula needs to look 2 to my left and 1 to my left. But this range needs to be locked or absolute. Now, the way you do that is you add dollar signs for all of the column and row references. Now, the quick way to do it is just hit the F4 key. Boom, it puts the dollar signs in everywhere. That means when we copy this, it will not move relatively. Control Enter. I'm going to double click and send it down. Now, relative cell references, those blue and green ones are still looking relative to me. The formula, where am I going to look? 1 cell to my left, and I'm sorry, 2 cells to my left and 1 cell to my left. Whereas this one was locked in every single cell or absolute. Now, most people know relative references and absolute. If you know the different, you know how to use those, you can make spreadsheets quickly. However, there are 2 other major types of cell references that help you speed up